Hello, writers, and welcome to the Author Burnout Coach, the show where we put the publishing industry and all sorts of societal messaging under a microscope. I'm your host, Isabel Sterling, YA author and certified life coach. In each episode, I offer you specific steps that you can take to break up with burnout and reclaim your love of stories. I'm on a mission to dismantle the bookish hustle culture, one writer at a time. I hope you'll join me. Hey writers, welcome to episode 24. Today I have quite the treat for you. I have Shelly Page, who is an agented author who has not yet had a book sell or a thing that we can really celebrate publicly. And it's such an interesting, fun, slightly stressful place to be in a career. So I am so excited to bring you this interview. Here we go. First off, thank you so much for joining me today. I am super excited to have you on, in part because you're, one, we're celebrating Pride Month, but also you're kind of in this interesting, like interstitial sort of stage in your writing career that we basically never talk about. It's sort of like how to get an agent and then like post book deal. And you're sort of like in that nice, probably not feeling nice, like middle ground. And you also have some exciting things that are secrets, which is also a huge part of being in this industry.
Yes.
But I'm not going to go on and on. Why don't you go ahead and start and tell us a little bit about who you are and what kind of writing you do?
Sure. Hi, I'm Shelly. I use she, her pronouns, and I write mostly young adult, contemporary fantasy, and horror. By trade, I'm an attorney. And I work with homeless LGBTQ youth. Most of them are of color. So that is particularly the audience that I try to write for. And I write whenever I can in between working. So yeah, that's pretty much me. I'm from Chicago and I now reside in LA. And I am just so excited to be working on some things and hopefully be able to announce a few things soon.
Cool. I knew you'd worked with LGBTQ youth, but I didn't realize you were an attorney. That's like fun and fancy.
Yeah. So I'm an attorney and all of my clients are homeless youth. And it's honestly a privilege to be able to represent them.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So before we get into sort of all of the things, I would love to hear, maybe like the quick highlight version of your journey as a writer so far, like what got you into writing, what made you like decide like, oh, I'm gonna like try to get published, and then to sort of like let people know kind of like where you are today, sort of like in the process.
Yeah. So I've been writing since I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, in my notebooks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always something that I really enjoyed doing. I didn't get into it seriously or trying to do it professionally until 2020. I started to write a book in 2019 and then realized that I didn't really know what I was doing.
Yeah.
And it was in 2020 that I joined Twitter and I, learned about different methods of plotting and got a few beta readers and things like that. And then I signed with my agent in the fall of 2020 with the same book that I had been writing since 2019. I had probably rewritten it maybe 4 times at that point. And we subbed that book for about 6 or 7 months. And then in the process of subbing it, wrote another book that I felt was stronger and more in line with the market. And we decided to pull the book that we had subbed. We were on probably the second or third round, I think, of submissions when we did that and switched it out. So yeah, that's pretty much been the process. That second book received an R&R, which I worked on and turned back in. So yeah, I think it's been a long journey and a learning experience for sure. But yeah, that is where I'm at. And I also worked on a bunch of other stuff in between then and now.
Yeah, and it's wild to sort of think about doing all of this stuff that's slow and takes forever and is hard kind of anyways, but then to do it really in the heart of the pandemic just must have been a whole extra layer of stuff.
Yeah, I think honestly it was helpful that, in terms of working from home, my job was they allowed us to work from home and we're still working from home for the most part. I only go into the office 2 days a week. So I think it's been helpful in terms of being able to set aside time to write and not having to have that extra time of commuting and
Mhm.
then being at the office. And like I would write during lunch, but people come in or like pull you to lunch meetings and things like that. I think it's been a little bit easier for me to find time to write, but also harder because it feels like all I do is work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's probably been the hardest part, but I think the pandemic helped me in a sense of like establishing a routine
Mm.
and being able to write more than I was previously.
Yeah, it's been so fascinating to talk to people of, for some folks, it sort of became this, almost like boon of creativity because of maybe different life circumstances or as an escape. And then for a lot
Yeah.
of folks, it was sort of just like their brains just completely shut down and we're just like, nope, no writing is happening at all. And just sort of like for listeners, neither one of those is better or worse than the other. It's just, we all handle things in different ways and they're all okay.
Yes, definitely.
So we will definitely cover being part of the LGBTQ community and other historically marginalized groups and how that influences burnout. But before we sort of get into that nuance, I would love to hear a bit from you about your experience with burnout overall. Like at what point in your journey did it, sort of first become something you're like, oh, I think I'm running up on some potential burnout here?
Yeah, I think probably the most recent thing that I can think of and the one where I was like, okay, I'm definitely burnt out is working on my revision, the
Mm.
R&R request that I received from a publisher. You always hear write while you wait.
Mhm.
So while you're on sub, you should be writing, or that that's a way to pass the time. And I did that with the first book that we subbed. I wrote the second book and I wasn't burnt out doing that. I think I took, all the time I wanted
Mhm.
and we subbed that and I started something new. And I guess I didn't expect to receive an R&R while working on something else. So then I was already writing during this time, and then I received this R&R, which was pretty extensive, and I had to rewrite the entire novel and set aside everything I was working on before. And I think if I had not been writing during the submission process for that second book, I probably wouldn't have been burnt out when I got the R&R, but because I was, it kind of felt like tedious to sort of transition back into a book that I hadn't been thinking about, and then also
Mm.
trying to come up with like an entire like new storyline. So I think I started to feel pretty burnt out probably halfway through that revision. It was super frustrating because it felt like this was a big deal and I was getting tired and it was hard for me to like try to write every day, which I did. I set, a very like minimum word like count every day for me to try to strive for,
Yeah.
which was like 500 words, 700 words, something low, and ended up writing above that most days. And then some days I just didn't write at all. It took me a little over 2 months to do the revision, which I think was no time at all. I think that was like super fast, probably the fastest I've written.
Mhm.
Um,
Well,
but I was
especially if
definitely,
you're basically redoing the whole book.
yeah,
That's very fast, I would argue.
yeah, yeah. And I think what helped is I knew the characters
Yeah.
very well. I think it's different when you're starting a brand new book and you don't know your characters, but these characters I knew very well. So yeah, I think definitely that was the time where I'm like, okay, I'm feeling really burnt out right now. It's hard for me to focus. It's hard for me to get the words on the page.
Yeah. So I want to pull back just a little bit. Now, the folks who listen to this podcast range from like brand new writers all the way. We have folks who have published more books than I have. So there are some folks who definitely know these terms, but just for the folks who don't, do you want to explain what an R&R is?
Yes, of course. Sorry. So an R&R is a type of revision, revise and resubmit, which is you can receive one from an agent or from an editor, but essentially it is a type of offer to revise the book based on specific feedback that that agent or editor felt needed addressing in the manuscript. So it's not an offer in the sense of, they're buying the book, or it's, and if you get one from an agent, it's not an offer saying they want to represent you. It's more of like a stepping stone. Basically, it's a way for them to say it's almost ready, but here are a few things that I felt needed tightening or needed changing. For me, the R&R I got was very extensive. I talked to a few other writers who've received them from publishers just to sort of prepare. And it can range from anything minor to, oh, I think this plot thread needs tightening, or I think, you can add a little bit more romance, to something major where, I want the mystery to be completely different, or I think, the tone of the book should be changed, or the ending should be changed. Honestly, there's no set type of request that you can get for those, but it's basically a please revise and resubmit.
Yeah. And I think that is especially, I mean, I certainly don't know if there are percentages of like the agent stage versus the editor stage of like when they ask for these, but I know part of it is writing a book and then revising a book can be very separate skill sets. So
Yes.
especially when it is a bigger thing like that, one, it's you wanting to make sure you're on the same page. And then two is like, I think from their perspective of like, asking for that versus just like making the offer is like, does this person have the skills to make these big changes?
Yes.
Because I've definitely heard of people who get book deals and then turns out not good at revising, and then they have a problem on their hands.
Yeah.
So that happens.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely two different skill sets. And it's sort of like not a test, but like just a temperature check to see how well you can incorporate feedback into your manuscript too. That's what I've heard, at least.
Yeah. And I think sometimes as writers, we can take that a little bit to the extreme, even not like an R&R, but just like edits in general from your agent or your editor, of thinking that that means we have to sort of just do exactly as they say.
Right.
And that is also not the case. It's about the nuance of it. It's about understanding what those changes mean for the story overall and trying to figure out, okay, if I change this thing, how does it ripple forward? I always, try to when I have clients or just like writer friends I'm talking to and they get an R&R and they're just like a week later, they're like, boop, 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 I did it. It's like, oh, I think a little bit deeper. Like it's usually if it was that easy to fix, they wouldn't have asked for an R&R.
Right.
If it was just something that simple. And there can, I think often, I'm curious for you, did you feel any external or internal pressure to like turn this around quickly? Because I do see that sometimes too with folks of just like, oh, I'm so close to having my dream come true. I'm just curious how that was for you.
Yeah, I definitely felt that. And then I was like, oh, I can do this. Like I'm just gonna quickly like fix this, and then it's gonna be good, and I'll get this book deal. No. I think for me, because the revisions were pretty extensive and I knew I was going to have to rewrite the entire book, that I wasn't going to be able to finish it in, a week or two, that this was going to take a lot of time and research. Basically, I got what you would consider to be an edit letter, but I also had a call prior to that where we talked about a few options. I got the edit letter, which was a few pages, and then that kind of detailed what we talked about on the call. And then, had some suggestions, some options. And I sat with that for a little bit, and I definitely re-outlined the story. I'm a plotter. I read a few blog posts from writers that detailed the R&R process and like what to do what to do once you get the edit letter from your publisher, right? So even if you sold, and like how to approach that. And I think it's a little more, I think I approached it where I wanted it to be tighter as I was revising than what I would usually do when I just started drafting by myself. So I think I was very careful about making sure every scene had, the elements that I wanted it to have. And, there's tension and there's, all of this good stuff, but also was addressing almost every single thing in the edit letter. There are some things that I disagreed with or felt that, maybe this wasn't a good fit. for the story, particularly because I am writing about a Black queer girl. And there was
Mhm.
a few things in there that, I was cautious about changing. And I ran that by my agent, and we ran that by the editor that offered the R&R. But overall, I made probably 99% of the changes. So that's definitely something that I think was going to take me months to do. And I didn't want to rush it. I knew I was burnt out when I started to do this revision. And I knew that if I rushed it, it would not be good, that I was just going to do myself a disservice. So I took my time. I think outlining was pivotal because I wasn't burnt out when I was outlining. um, but I was a little burnt out when I was drafting. And I think at least I had a good roadmap to follow.
Yeah, so I would love to dig into that a little bit more, the burnout piece of it. And talking to other people, I think we all experience burnout in slightly different ways. So what was it about that process where you were like, oh, this, I'm noticing these things and thinking, okay, that means I'm burnt out. What is sort of like the symptoms for you?
Yeah. So the main one is when I'm trying to write and I'm doing it in broken English. And when I'm leaving myself a lot of like notes along the way. So like where I'm like, oh, add description, then they go to this place in like
Mm.
quotation marks. And I can like tell that my prose is starting to just be very like basic. Like prose is something that I adore. Like one of the things that I love about reading as well. When I notice that I'm not caring about that anymore and I'm kind of just like not rushing, but just trying to get like just the basics down. I'm just doing dialogue or I'm just doing movement for the scene. That's kind of an indicator for me. Like I'm not doing any internal thought. I'm just like, this is what's happening in the scene, move on.
Yeah, so it sounds like from what it almost sounds like an emotional disconnect from the story a little bit.
Yes, definitely. And like I said, I try to write every day. So I think that was the way that I could like write every day where I felt like I'm still like progressing in the story, even though I'm a little burnt out. I think when I was really burnt out is when there's this days I just like couldn't really put anything down on the page. And then I also try to read a lot while I write. So I write young adult. I try to read a lot of young adult books
Mhm.
because that's the age category, particularly ones that are in my genre. So I find like I can't read more than like a few pages, I can't write more than a few words. That's a good indicator too that I'm burnt out. But I do think I have like a high work ethic just from like being in law school and being like
Mhm.
burnt out doing that. So I still wrote almost every day, even though I was very, very tired.
Yeah, and it's so interesting looking at it from the outside of that high work ethic where you are used to being able to just like push, 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 push. Probably served you super well in law school, like you just have to get through it. And
Right.
then when you kind of shift to something that's like so creative, like writing, and we pull those same sort of patterns with us, we can still get to the end, but kind of like it's sort of like at what cost? Like
Yeah.
what are we losing, it's such a hard thing to write a book. And then when you get to a place where you're not really getting the restorative joy part of it, it can be really, I mean, stressful and, continue to contribute to burnout. I'm curious when I think about burnout, it's not the number of deadlines, it's not how short the deadline is. It's usually rooted in what's driving you to work. So sort of the thought that's like, in this case, probably like creating like a sense of pressure or urgency. Do you kind of know like maybe what was different about the fact that it was like, was it just because you had to switch projects that your mindset was in a different space? Was it specifically about knowing that there was like a specific editor waiting on it? Like, I'm curious, like if you had a different experience sort of approaching the story, kind of on that mindset piece of it.
I think it's twofold. One, like the creativity thing, like getting joy, feeling joy in writing. I think I was getting that while I was drafting the new project. And then I also got that, don't get me wrong, I got that while I was doing the R&R. And I loved the story and the direction that the revision took the story. And I felt like it was a lot more cohesive and stronger and more atmospheric, and all of the things I love about writing, I definitely tried to incorporate into this revision. I think there was definitely that pressure and that driving factor of like, okay, this is not, this could get me to a different level in my writing career, right? Like if I can revise this well and the editor likes what I've done, they might offer on the book. And, you know, I talked about this with my agent who said that R&Rs aren't a guaranteed offer, right? Like it's not you revise and then boom, you now have a book deal. So I knew that, but I also knew that, you know, even if it didn't pan out, I could still, that we were still going to send the revision to all of the other editors that had the old version of the story. So we basically told them all, you know, hey, we're revising this story. Would you like to see a new version of this when it was finished? And everyone said yes. So I knew that not only was this going to the editor that offered the R&R, but it was also going to go to the other editors on our sub list. So I think that was like the added pressure, and it felt like this was kind of like my opportunity, right? Like this is like the moment, and I don't want to mess it up, and I don't want to let feeling like I'm tired or like that I'm burnt out get in the way of that. So that's kind of like what I was telling myself. I mean, like I said, there were days where I just couldn't, and I just took the day because I knew that would serve me better than trying to push through. I think, yeah, that work ethic of like being in law school and just like, it's just go, 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 go. And lawyers are notorious for like being burnt out, and we have like the highest, our profession has like one of the highest rates of, you know, alcohol abuse, and like it's just like this, like I don't know, this culture of working yourself to the bone. And I think that's not good, but also like that's something that I've internalized over the years. And yeah, I was conscious of that while I was doing this, but also I was able to find joy in revising. And I think that's probably what kept me going the most, were these little nuggets of real like love for the story.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a balance because we certainly can't wait and only write on the days where like, oh, everything is beautiful and wonderful. And of course I want to write. Like
Right.
books don't get done that way. Just they don't get finished. Oh, on the flip side is, you know, you can get through a couple books and you can do that for a while. But if you sort of let yourself fall into that trap where you're always just like, this is the one it has to be, and you sort of like build up that like anxious sort of like energy inside of you, you can get through a couple of books like that, but eventually that shit's gonna catch up with you and you're
Oh
gonna,
yeah, for sure.
you know, whole just not greatness, just not good. So I love that you were able to still pull in some of that joy and find those nuggets in there, and it didn't skew too much one way or the other. But yeah, it's definitely like this constant balance. And I even, you know, I also try to write right now. I'm trying to write most days just because, and again, I love a low word count goal. There was a point too where my goal was literally just to open the manuscript most days of the week. Like that was literally the goal, because when we set some of those higher goals, it can, your brain can get like intimidated by not
Yes.
wanting to spend that kind of energy. And I don't know where I was going with the sentence. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Things. This is that mom brain thing. Okay. So let's just, well, it'll, if it comes back, it comes back. But I would love to kind of shift a little bit. So you've got this sort of a whole thing going on with the R&R, and I imagine you're still waiting on like what's gonna pan out with that.
Yes, we're still waiting. I sent that back 2 weeks ago, so
Okay.
it's not been
So
a lot of
so
time.
yeah, like no time in publishing.
Yeah.
Publishing is, I always just say, just like the weirdest industry. It's like sometimes stuff happens in like 12 hours and sometimes it happens in like 18 months. And you don't know.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
just is what it is. But one of the things I am such a huge proponent on is celebrating all the little wins along the way. But in publishing, that can get a little weird or tricky when the things that you would want to celebrate are publicly a secret. So we obviously
Mm.
won't give away any details, but I know you've got some like things that
Something
you've
else.
got. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear a little bit about like what's that experience been like where it's you have something that's exciting, but you just like can't talk about it. And if you've been able to find ways to celebrate, more privately with, close friends and stuff. That is one of the secrets of publishing is everything's a secret, but you tell all your friends. It's just not public. It's so funny. I always love when newer writers are like, I have good news, but I can't tell you. I'm like, slide into the DMs. You can totally tell me.
Oh yeah.
Like, we
Oh
all
yeah.
do it. We all do it. But I'm just curious how that's been of like, not being able to be like, here's this like amazing thing, but it has to stay like more private.
I think so I have a housemate and we definitely celebrate everything. We celebrated the R&R, we made cinnamon rolls, and we celebrated when I finished revising. We celebrated this other thing. I think celebrating the small things is what makes it feel like an accomplishment because people are like, if you're on Twitter, you see people announcing and you see people like, oh, like my book won this award. And you're like, wow, this is amazing. Like, and it's public. So it feels huge. And it is, right? It is huge. But like when you're in this like in between stage, it's hard to sort of get that same feeling and celebration publicly. So I think doing it just like with close friends is something that has helped me at least. Yeah, so I celebrate all the small things.
I love that. I
Yeah.
truly
And
think
I
that
think
is so important.
yes, definitely. I mean, I'm very food driven. So
Me too.
so if there's something that's like even remotely exciting, I'm like, okay, like let's go get food. Also, I have way too many books. So I also celebrate by pre-ordering books
Yep.
because I know I don't need any more, but I'm like, these are my friends' books. I have to pre-order these. I have to go buy these, but I like only do it I'm trying to like only buy in bulk when I have something that I can celebrate because that's like a way that I can get away with like buying people's books, but then also celebrating because I love buying books. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely have a book problem. And the more
Yeah.
friends you make in publishing, the harder it gets because you're like, well, I have to have a collection of all of my friends' books. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden your friends have like 10 books and you're like, oh, that's a lot of
Like, oh
books.
wow. This is like an entire shelf.
Yeah, I know.
Just for you.
It's gonna be soon. We're gonna have a couple of like designated shelves for certain friends because they just have so many books, which is so exciting, but it's also a
Yeah.
lot of books. All right, cool. So now we'll kind of, we are in Pride Month, of course, and
Yay.
which woo, love it. And so, you'll be my fourth interview, or I guess fourth episode, third interview. One of them I had to split into two because it was so long. But I would love to hear, your thoughts on being part of the LGBTQ community. Also, of course, being a Black writer and how all of that kind of plays into different pressures that you might feel. You kind of alluded to it a little bit with some of the edits that were requested
Yeah.
and just some of the things that you have to deal with that, our allo cis het white authors just don't even have to think about.
Yeah. I think there's always something happening in publishing too. Like there's
Yep.
always
There's always something.
some discourse. So I also struggle with anxiety.
Mm.
I have like a diagnosed anxiety disorder. And I think that it, I think being a Black queer writer sort of triggers my anxiety a lot of the time when I'm writing. I think about so many things. And I try to write without thinking about, oh, how is my character going to be perceived? Like, what is she doing something that isn't in line with like what people would expect or, XYZ thing. I think I've sort of kind of blocked that while I'm writing, but that is definitely coming into play when I'm revising. That's kind of the way that I've been able to handle my anxiety about writing about a Black queer woman or teen. I think it's hard. There's a delicate balance. And I think I focus mostly on my character's arc. I think like what's driving them? What is it that they need to learn? And that's like my main thing. But also, there's all this external stuff. So I'll say, for instance, in my book, it's dealing a little bit with the police and like the sheriff. And so in my character is Black, how is she feeling about being caught up in this web of possible I don't even know how to describe it without giving everything
I
away.
know it's so hard. It's like, I don't want to give spoilers.
So essentially, how does she feel about this, right? So, and as a black girl, because she's in a small town and there's not many Black people in her town, so she is feeling singled out, and I think that's a feeling that I've felt definitely before,
Mm-hmm.
and I think is very common for a lot of people of color when they're feeling isolated. And I definitely wanted to address that in my book. I think I've picked certain moments that I could really speak to or really address some of the problems and fears that, you know, I have as a Black woman, but also as a Black queer woman. Yeah, I try to find a little moments in my story where, you know, this is the perfect time for me to talk about XYZ
Mm-hmm.
thing and how that makes my character feel and how my readers who are of the same identity would feel as well or would connect to.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's definitely something I've considered. It definitely causes anxiety though.
Yeah.
And also because everyone has a different experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
mean, this is just my experience and what I think my character, based on her experiences, would deal with certain things. But that's not to say that it would apply or be something that other readers would necessarily feel as well. So I think, yeah, it's weird.
Yeah. Well, and I think that in particular is something that sort of like fear of your story and, you know, legitimate fear because we see it happen over and over and over, but your story sort of being held up as like, well, this must be what it's like to be a Black queer girl
Right.
being in this, you know, time and place. Whereas I think that is something that white authors who aren't queer, you know, who are cisgender, like they don't even, that's not even a consideration. They're not going to have to worry that, like, oh, my straight white girl in this book, you know, people are going to think that's how all straight white girls, it's just not even a consideration.
Right. Right.
And I wonder too how you balance something that I think about a lot of wanting to, you know, for the readers who share the identity of your character, being able
Yes.
to honor their lived experiences without sort of further like adding like further trauma to their life. That's
Mm,
something I think about a lot. And I'm curious how you think about that.
yeah. I think I put my characters through the ringer and it's really
Well, and that's
unfortunate.
part of fiction too, is like we kind of have to do that, but there's a fine line you gotta walk.
Yeah. And honestly, that was one of the revision notes, right? So
Mm,
one of the revision suggestions was that there be more joy in the story. And I think I struggled with that a lot because I don't necessarily write joyful stories,
mm,
but there are moments of joy, right, that I was able to find in the story in life in general.
mhm.
So I kind of I didn't want my character to seem too traumatized, and I didn't want to re-traumatize any of my readers. I don't think anything in my story necessarily is too traumatizing, but there are parts, like I said, there are moments that I thought this needs addressing. And I did the best I could with, you know, what I thought my character would think about in those moments. Yeah. So I think overall, I tried to make it fairly, what are the word for it? Opposite of.
Yeah. Well, and as we're sort of like talking about this, I'm thinking about too, like you can only really, as the writer, just sort of like be thoughtful and be deliberate about the choices you're making, because what I think is just help, you know, there's something about being able to see like your own negative experiences on the page and sort of feel seen and witnessed in a way that can be really like cathartic. But that
Right.
same exact scene for somebody else might be triggering or traumatizing. So there's
Yes.
no like right way to do it, but just as the creator being really intentional about like what it is you're creating. And I think it's also part of what's hard because, and I'm thinking about when I do like my writing specifically kind of in like the queer space, since I'm a white woman, that's sort of white queer woman, that's where I sort of do my thing. But like I try to make the world like a little bit better, like a little bit more accepting, a
Mm,
little bit, but without denying some of the realities that queer people face in terms of discrimination and
mm,
stuff. And it's such a fine line to walk because I don't want it to be just as like utopia, but I also
Right.
don't want to just be like, and here's another place where everybody hates us and like there's all like so it's such a and I don't think there's a right single balance. I think we need books that cover that whole, sort of whole that whole spectrum of
Mhm.
balance, but I know something I think about a lot.
Yeah, I think about that too. I mean, there's moments where queerness is discussed, there's a few moments, and a few moments where being Black in a mostly all white town are also discussed. I think it was a balance of, not wanting it to seem like this is the worst place on earth. And um, because, that's not how my character feels about her town. Yeah, it was a balancing act the entire time, I think. And it's like, constantly walking a tightrope. I tried to have it so that, and maybe it's just me, but like, so I'm out with my family, everyone's super supportive, and it's the same for my characters. I know that's not true of a lot of queer people,
Mhm.
and particularly queer people of color too. I mean, or from religious families, and just like there's a whole spectrum of experiences. So I think I like to write from my experience of being out, and it's been mostly positive. So that's what I've created for my characters. I hope it reads very welcoming.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you keep bringing it back to like this particular character because at the end of the
Yes.
day, this is one fictional human being with one specific experience.
Yes.
And I love like sort of like for her, this is her experience and not other people may just try to like take that and make it too broad, but at least like as the creators, we can say like, no, this is her singular experience. This is not representative of everybody.
Oh yeah, for sure. And all of the choices too that I've made, I'm like, this is just for this character, this and this moment. And I don't want to make it seem like that's the universal experience at all.
Is there anything else sort of around, identity with burnout
Mm.
that you wanted to cover? Or if not, we can talk about sort of maybe ways you've attempted sort of to reduce your own burnout when you're creating.
Yeah, I think one is to set aside a time during the day. For me, it's between 7 and 9 p.m. where I don't write at all, where I
Mm,
just do something that's just for me. So, sort of self care for those 2 hours of the day.
I love that. And so I thought you were going to go with like those are my writing hours. And I love that you were like, nope, this is the no writing. This is the time
Yes.
that is set aside to just be a human. I love that.
Yeah, that's super important. I think I was doing that. I do that even when I'm not writing. So, like,
Mm,
that is a time for me. Um, and yeah, it's sort of it's not a lot of time, so you don't feel like very like you don't feel reset and like refreshed, but you do sort of feel like a person for that little bit of time. Like you're not just like serving the manuscript or like
right.
like for me like serving my clients. It's helped me for sure. I think there are days where I'm like, I have to like maybe I'll only take an hour today. Like I don't know, I need to like really get this done, and it's like this like pressure, and I start to get like obsessive and
Mm,
like very very like I have to write now. I'm wasting time. Like that's always something that's in the back of my head. I'm like,
yeah.
I'm wasting this like hour by like watching TV. I really should be writing. But you're like, no, like I actually do need this time for myself. I try to be a little strict with myself about that. Like, no, like you're taking these 2 hours and you're gonna have dinner and you're gonna watch a movie and that's it. Or you're gonna go for a walk or whatever it is and just get out of your head for a little bit. I think that's
Yeah.
really helped with like my anxiety too, where it's like I am someone that needs a schedule. It's always nice to sort of like after that 2 hours is up, be like, wow, that feels like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
Now I can like go back and write until the end of the night or whatever it is.
Yeah. No, I really, really love that a lot of just sort of that like making that space. And I think it's so funny, the whole concept of time being something that we can waste is such like a, I don't know, it's such like a capitalistic, patriarchal, every minute you must be producing, and it's
Mhm.
so ingrained. 'Cause I have such a hard time with that personally. Like I very much have a brain that is like, okay, I've got 20 minutes. Like, what can I get done? Instead of just being like, why don't I just chill and just like
Yeah.
hang out with the dogs? But no, my brain very much is conditioned to like, also, I mean, for me, like growing up, it was a lot of like, gotta work hard and have a, similar to Jack about like the good work ethic, like that was like, seen as such like a moral thing. So to just like have
Right.
chill time seems so counterintuitive, but it's so important to just like have time to be a human, and that time is valuable. It is important. You don't have to constantly be creating, but we've
Right.
definitely been sort of taught, especially like in, the US and Western kind of capitalism, like that is like the most important thing is get all the words in and do
Yeah,
all
like
the
if you're,
things.
but yeah, if you're not working, you're lazy. And it's like,
Right.
I constantly struggle with, I'm like,
Yeah.
no, you don't have to be doing this right now. But then it's like, sometimes if I don't do it, then I'm even more anxious. I think that's like a product of the anxiety where it's like, okay, well, I've just sat here for like 2 hours doing nothing. And now I need to work until midnight because, because
Yeah.
I've wasted time.
Gotta love that
So,
anxiety. Yeah. And then it's
I
it's
know.
sort of like you have to really actively like talk to yourself of like the time is not wasted, that time is restorative. Like it was, and you have to like very actively do that. Because if you let your brain just do its thing, especially because I also struggle with anxiety. It's been real bad recently just because there's other family stuff going on that's sort of like spiked it up. So left unattended, my brain does some of the most asshole shit. Just like
Yeah.
spins and spins and all of that. So you have to be really intentional about what your brain is doing, or else it just can be a huge contributor to burnout.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think too, like during the revision, I was like not getting a lot of sleep. I was waking up
Mm,
early. I was
yeah.
like, I have to get up. I have to work on this for work. And I have to work on this during lunch. And I have to work on this after work.
And that have to energy is can just be like so depleting.
Yeah. Quickly, quickly depletes. I had like a weekend away in Joshua Tree during the revision. And even during that, I was like, wow, it's been 2 days of me not working on the book. But I think I found ways to like kind of combat that by like staying very active. So it feels like I'm doing something. That's how I manage that. And then also when I come back, I was able to write twice as much than what I
Yeah.
was usually writing, which
Right. Because
is
when you actually restore and take the time to
right.
rest, your brain is like, all right, we can do things again. We're not like fighting to get every two words.
Yeah. I was like, wow, I just sat here and wrote twice as much as I usually do. And I don't feel burnt out anymore. I think, yeah, it's a constant struggle.
Yeah. And I
Now
think
I've not done anything. I'm like, I deserve this time.
yes, take some time off. It's super important. Actually, if you haven't, I really recommend the book Rest. I'll message you and I'll put
Oh
it in the
yeah.
show notes because for me, I'm always like, yeah, you're supposed to rest, blah, blah, blah. That's what everybody says. But reading that and seeing like the science behind it, like, oh, you actually do have to rest. And rest isn't literally
Yeah.
just sitting on the couch watching TV. Like rest can be going for a walk or doing like
Mhm.
a completely unrelated hobby. It was a really helpful read. It's one I probably should just like read every other month. So I don't forget
Yeah,
that like rest
yeah.
is important. Because yeah, it is can be. Oh, I was gonna say too, I love the shift and it helps me so much sort of like get out of that like, oh, have to energy of if I catch myself saying that I have to go work on my book, I love to reframe and go, I get to go play with my story. And shifting have
Mm.
to get to and work to play just completely shifts my energy when I approach the page.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna try that for sure. That's something I need to work on.
Yeah, I find that it's so helpful when I think about like, oh, I have to go work my book. I just feel so tense and like, oh, I don't want to, and it's gonna be hard. But if it's like I get to go play with my story, it just like it feels so much looser. And then I'm like, okay, let me just like,
Yeah.
it takes away the need to get it right. It takes away a lot of those sort of other pieces.
Yeah. I love that.
All right, we're getting close to an hour. So any final thoughts? And then if not, slash after that, I would love for you to tell the listeners where they can find you so that when you are able to announce your secret news, they will get to hear all about it.
Yay, secret news.
Secret news.
Any final thoughts? No, I think the thing I wanted to say about burnout is definitely having time set aside where you just work on self-care, which is what I was
Yes.
able to say and what we were just talking about, because that's what's really helped me the most. And then also sort of like not being so hard on yourself if you're unable to write as much as you want it to one day, and like really listening to your brain in terms of like, I can't keep writing today. Like there's always a point where I'm like, okay, I can't do much more than this right now. And then I just stop. And I think that's really important, because pushing through is like just worsening the problem.
Yes. Yeah, I love to stop when I can kind of feel like, okay, I could push and keep going to X word count. Whenever I catch myself saying that I could push, I'm like, or I could just stop. And when I do
Yeah.
that, like consistently, I end up over time, like writing more week over week versus if I did do that, pushing for
Yes.
that extra like couple hundred words or whatever.
Yes, definitely. I've definitely noticed that. And people talk about refilling the well,
Mhm.
refilling the creative well. That's why I love to read while I'm writing. It's like a way that I can like kind of refill a little bit. And I also read before I go to bed.
Mm.
And that's also just in that, my like reading time before bed is, I'm usually reading a book that isn't in my age category, isn't in my genre. I'm obsessed with middle grade books. I will read a middle grade book before bed. I also really like adult thrillers, which is something I don't write. I'll also read that, or adult rom-coms. So those are like my three categories that I will go to at the end of the day, where I'm like, okay, this is for me. You know, like this isn't
It's not like
like, these
market
are my favorite.
research. It's, yeah.
Yeah, this isn't research. This isn't like me like deep diving into some like, you know, like Wikipedia page about XYZ thing. It's just like, it's just for me. And fanfics. I will read a fanfic all night
Ooh.
long. So like, I think that's really important, because reading for me feels very productive. So I think in that, like I was saying, that really helps with my anxiety. It's like, I'm being productive right now. I don't have to be like anxious that I'm not doing anything. And reading is one of those things. So like, and I also paint. Painting is also one of
Oh,
those
fun.
things for me.
Yeah.
If there's a way that you can find a hobby or like something that you really love doing that makes it feel like you're turning off your brain a little bit and being able to recharge, definitely do that. And like have a set time for that. Because then I look forward to that, right? I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, I get to like read tonight, or oh, I can't wait to watch this movie. And then it really helps with the recharge and helps with like finding little moments throughout the day that like you're enjoying. And over time, it definitely helps with the burnout. Like it's like, wow, I've had a good day. And I find it's easier for me to write when I've had a good day. Yeah.
Totally. All right. Where can the people find you and keep an eye out for your news?
Yes. So you can mostly find me on Twitter. That's like where I lurk. It's Shelly_P_writes. And then I also have a website, shellypage.com. So stay tuned.
Yay, I can't wait. Yeah, and I will have all the links below so folks can just go right into the show notes, click, and just be right on your website and Twitter. Thank you again for joining us today and being the final Pride Month interview. It was fun to have you here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I loved our conversation, and I am so excited to listen to this.
All right, writers, that's all from us this week. Happy writing. If you enjoyed this podcast, then you've got to get on my email list. You'll get my best advice sent right to your inbox with concrete steps on how to stay in love with writing and banish burnout for good. Go to isabelsterling.com/join to sign up. When you do, you'll get one of my favorite worksheets, the 5 causes of writer's block. I teach you how to diagnose why you're stuck and how to get writing again. That's isabelsterling.com/join. See you next week.